for those of you who weren't in our earlier sessions. A few words of background about how we are coming to this subject. The World Academy of Art and Science was founded in 1960 by a group of eminent intellectuals coming from many different countries. People, names you'll know like Albert Einstein, Bertrand Russell, the founding head of the FAO, UNESCO, people from the natural sciences, the physical sciences, the social sciences, the arts, the humanities, some former diplomats, people from international organizations who felt, and I'm talking 65 years ago, or 55 years ago, that in our approach to knowledge, that we need to look at things comprehensively and recognize that knowledge doesn't fit any narrow definition, and that all different disciplines, including the humanities and the arts, have an important contribution to make to our overall understanding of what the world is and what reality is. Though the Academy over the years has spent a lot of time talking about very practical, concrete issues like nuclear disarmament, the information technology. Way back in the 60s, they started looking at information technology, population explosion, the environmental challenges, grappling. We have a program on the need for new economic theory, global rule of law, all very practical issues. At the other end of the spectrum, we also have a feeling that it's important to look at the softer side of what we call knowledge and some of the issues that are of fundamental central importance to our life, but with which any one discipline, whether it's science or philosophy or religion or spirituality, have very different views. So we thought it would be interesting to take the opportunity of BioVision to raise some questions and share some different perspectives with you on a subject which I think of all the subjects that human beings can come and sit and talk about is at once the most central to our existence and the most difficult for us to comprehend, understand, or get our hands around, and that is human consciousness. What is human consciousness? What is it that makes us different? What is it that makes us who we are? We have not come here with any representing the World Academy with any official view. The Academy has no official view on this. We have 700 members and probably have 700 different views on it. We've come here to share our own thoughts coming from different fields of experience and different backgrounds, and to open it up and hear from you and dialogue with you on what you think on a subject which is of such importance to all of us. So with that brief introduction, I'd like to introduce Mila Popovich. For those of you who haven't heard her earlier, she's a professor of comparative literature in Colorado, and she's going to speak and tell us her thoughts on what consciousness is. Thank you. Mila?
What I would like to do is to literally read an abstract from my paper, maybe somewhat extended abstract beyond 300 words, but use it as a setting up the theme, as well as maybe use it as a discussion starter for later. Maybe that's the best way to go about it. So the title of my paper is "The Future of Scientific Probing and social being, because I was really interested in where the scientific inquiry and research is going to take us, while at the same time what is going to happen to us as a collectivity, as a society, as a multitude of societies, as well as a civilization and species. So the topic is the future of scientific probing and social being, quantum computation, artificial intelligence, and consciousness. This is a very dear topic to me, and I will give a very short personal introduction as to what is it that moves me about this topic. At too many gatherings, I have listened to catastrophizing, always about terrible things and terrible times that we live in, of the supposed ethical void of our times as if all the values are lost, or some imminent doom. I hope that this paper, as briefly as I can present it to you, and my perspective as your fellow human and a partner in the co-creation of our reality, that it can offer us a sense of comfort and reassurance in our capacity to evolve and move into a future of a greater well-being. Assessing the state-of-the-art advances in scientific research and the state of affairs in our social life, this paper evaluates and forecasts the course of the future human development. In particular, it addresses both sides of our polarized responses to the progress of artificial intelligence and the so-called transhumanism. On one side, celebratory excitement, how the science is going to make us bigger, better, and surpass us. And on the other hand, and the anxiety-infused doom pronouncement, as if this is the end of the world. And what I want to do is go beyond both, because I want to search for the outlook that goes beyond both. Would you rather have me speak in my natural voice or with microphone? Even with the interruption? Yes. So, that being said, on what we typically have in the scientific or any other thinking community, we have very polarized, divided opinions. One of them is saying, come on, technology, we'll take all of you and it'll be for the better. And the others are saying, oh, that's it, the robots are going to surpass us, this is going to be a transhuman society. We as humans are going to be pretty much rendered irrelevant. I begin by referring to the joint work of Roger Penrose, mathematical physicist, and Stuart Hameroff, he's an anesthesiologist and consciousness researcher, on the relatedness of the quantum physics processes and human consciousness processes. Proposing the notion of quantum gravity, Penrose developed with Hameroff a model of how quantum computation can occur at the sub-neural scale of our brains. Preoccupied with the issues of the high level of computational complexity and the notion of non-computable, they maintain that the brain is performing quantum computation and that consciousness is a quantum process in the time-space geometry. Consciousness is defined by them as a self-organizing process at the fundamental level of the universe. So we're talking of the universal, cosmic intelligence. So, consciousness is defined by them as a self-organizing process at the fundamental level of the universe, which is characterized by the principle of non-locality, according to which everything is connected to everything else. At that dimension, it does not matter where you're located in time and space. At that dimension, we transcend it, and the dimension is defined by non-locality, meaning it doesn't matter. We're all at that dimension interconnected. And our intelligences are. You think of the possibilities of tapping into each other's brilliance, into the brilliance of the ones that came before us, and something that has been called the Akashic field from the tremendous knowledge of the Indian texts, Upanishads, that says that we in fact have cumulatively created universal records of intelligence that are available to us if you are capable to sense them and if you're conscious of them. The notion of interconnectedness then does not only preoccupy these fields of research, but also deeply affects and increasingly manifests in the expansion of our social lives. Our times are marked by the parallel advances in what a famous French philosopher, Jean-Luc Nancy, one of the most renowned philosophers of our time, calls the Copernican revolution in social being. Paradoxically, the revolution in social consciousness and social being simultaneously questions the potentially detrimental effects of scientific research and is also informed by the finding of such research that alerts us to the laws of non-locality and entanglement, enmeshment on the deepest level of even our biochemistry. On that level, theoretical physics, quantum mechanics, neuroscience, and consciousness studies demonstrate that advances in scientific probing and revolution in social being are, in fact, interrelated developments. When it comes to the matter of artificial intelligence and deeper probing into human consciousness and biomaterial, Penrose and Hameroff point out the difference between intelligence and consciousness, consisting of qualia, uniquely subjective way of experiencing life. Every single one of you is a unique perceiver, a unique focalizer. You are, if you will, the eyes, the ears of God. And in the Islamic thought, you're all nodding. This resonates with you. So the difference between intelligence and consciousness, consisting of unique qualia, the uniquely subjective way of experiencing life, capacity for emotions, that is a nuanced emotional range of our inner life. You start telling me what's going on internally every day, and there's a whole universe inside that nobody knows about. And reflexivity, ability to ponder oneself and one's mental and psycho-emotional processes. That is the precondition for development. Consequently, increasing computational complexity might mean taking artificial intelligence to the brink of consciousness, and yet, from artificial intelligence, there will always remain an irreducible difference, distance, and deferral, delay, to consciousness. As I examine the question and the problematic of clones and qualia, prosthetic bodies, and artificial minds, I evaluate what we have charted for our future course. As we push the frontier of exploration and forward into the ever-receding horizon of inquiry, there is always yet another hill to cross, because we create another hill in the process of finding another truth. As we push the frontier of exploration and forward into the ever-receding horizon of inquiry, we are poised to evolve and transition into a society led by collaborative work between consciousness experts and scientific visionaries who are themselves interdisciplinary boundary benders, a society which is engendering an increasingly spiritualized science and scientifically supported spirituality. Thank you. Shukran.
Thank you very much, Mila. I'd like to now introduce Alberto Zucconi, who's a psychotherapist and runs a very large institution for training psychotherapists in Italy. And he was a student of Carl Rogers, for those of you who know the famous psychologist, one of the most famous psychologists of the 20th century.
Good afternoon. Spirituality is one of the words that can mean many different things. I could say many other words that have a meaning as different as many people. But anyhow, what we call in my field, which is the field of mental health, and health protection and promotion by spirituality is whatever people that are research consider spiritual. It can be belonging to a religion, it can be actually not being on any congregation. It's just what they refer as their spiritual dimension. And we've been having, for the last 15 years, some research, and the data coming today come from one major analysis of the literature done by the Foundation for Mental Health in the UK, in England, and by a report that is written and is online by Dr. Cornack, that encompasses a lot of research that's been going on and says that people find that spirituality helps them, and especially when they feel in trouble, beaten, in need, the people that can sincerely feel that they have access to a reservoir of whatever, be God or being their spiritual realms, they feel helped by that. Now, science has taken interest and has found that actually this subjective feeling corresponds actually to what we consider empiric proof. Especially in this research of the literature, people that have a physical or mental problems, if they have something to hope for, actually they would get better and faster than people that do not have such a feeling. How that mechanism works out? Well, basically, like everything in my field, it's clear. If I can be aware, Mila was saying it before, actually, I agree. We all live in a construed reality. Part of the reality is socially construed, and we call it culture. But inside the culture, I construe my daily reality, my relationship with myself, others, and the world. And if I am able to interpret some tragedy or some, suffering in a way that gives a meaning to it, then I'll help. For example, I'll give you an example. In my office in Rome, in the same palace, in the same building, there is a lady that has had the husband with a stroke lose his mobility, and then I saw her just before coming to Alexandria, and I said, "How you doing? How is your husband?" She said, "He's in the hospital, and they made a hole in his stomach because he cannot eat anymore," and all that. Pretty grim situation. So I said, in these cases, since both my parents had long suffering illness, I don't know what the one has to hope. And she answered, "Oh no, life is sacred," she said. And I don't wish my husband to shorten his suffering, because everything, she said in a convincing tone, everything has a meaning in life. I was hit by that because for my father and my mother, 14 years of Alzheimer, actually I was hoping that her days would be shortened, not because I saw her suffering. This lady really hit because she was genuine. So, whatever is your belief from divine intervention, God, or that there is a meaning in the universe, this is going to be helpful. And the mechanism through which we can have a potential benefit are coping style, to feel that we are not, out of control. There is a reason the universe is, in a sense, I'm, in control of this. To the social support and the networks of people that share the same belief, and a physiological mechanism that actually, at the level of immunodeficiency or just having hope, lowers the anxiety and actually improve also one's physical condition. For example, people that with the hope in other research, whatever the hope in God, the hope on there is a intelligence in the universe, or hope that the doctor that is going to intervene with surgery on me is a good doctor, or this is a good hospital, hope, whatever form of hope, is beneficial to our health. So, the religious or spiritual belief may allow a person to live in a different reality, to reframe something that everybody, including the person, feels is very bad. And this again, I'm reminded of a student of mine. I train people at the level of postgraduate training, and he became a trainee, and he was a colonel in the Italian army, an atheist. And he wanted to become a psychotherapist because he was a psychologist. Then, years later, he came to visit me, and he was wearing a clergyman. I was really impressed of the change. And I said, what happened? And he told me that he accompanied one of his friends to visit a holy man, a priest, but a holy man in the province of Rome, and that he was kind of putting down his friend for being so silly to believe that the holy man existed. And he said, Alberto, you know me, he was a very, always kidding and all that. He said, I accompanied my friend, I don't know what happened, I started to cry, and I felt all the weight that I had, the burden, existential burden, lifted. And so they say, how did you interpret? Say, believe it or not, I converted myself to Catholicism, and nowadays I'm a priest in Livorno, which is a city in the seaside. I was really taken by this, because he was actually very skeptic in everything, and I have seen he's still pretty happy priest, to my opinion. So, religious and spiritual belief allow a person at times to reframe and reinterpret events that are seen before as uncontrollable, and this reframing gives sense and make the same thing much less stressful and much more meaningful of being the victim of a blind universe. And the social support that the one has with shared belief system also are well known in my field. But there is another point. Resilient people have more capable of effective crisis management than those that don't have those skills. And I belong to a field that is called humanistic psychology, and we don't interpret it like other systems of psychology, religion or spiritual belief as a form of pathology, but we see it as a natural part of the human experience. Maslow, for example, explored people that they had thousands of people that were the best in whatever they were doing. And those people in common had that they had peak experience. They all, religious or not, felt at one with the universe. The same thing is I studied with Carl Rogers that Gary was mentioning. Well, Carl Rogers had the concept of the fully functioning person. And a fully functioning person is possible because we are actually genetically made with the self-actualization capacity. And a person that reach their full potentiality actually are, here you see it, people that are not only concerned for themselves, are concerned for others, and also feel not alone, feel at home in the universe. I would like to conclude saying that I do not belong to any organized religion, but I certainly feel at home in the universe, and I understand the words of the mystics. That doesn't matter what denomination, what religion. If I read Rumi, or Santa Teresa d'Avila, or St. John of the Cross, or Santa Caterina da Siena, there is a common experience. Or Epicuro, for that matter, Plotino, to feel that you are not isolated from fellow human beings and from life. To feel like the physicists teach us that we are part of the universe and to have the right to belong to the universe. And in that way, for each hour of the life that has been lived, at the beginning as a Catholic boy, at the present of an agnostic person, I do not feel alone. Not only when I'm just with myself, the person who spends every hour of my life, but I feel also in company, in good company, if I see a tree or the rising sun in the morning, if I wake up very early. So spirituality is something that is not a bad word and is a natural resource for all human beings, in my opinion.
Thank you very much, Alberto. I think you can see that already that we come with diverse perspectives and experiences and are trying to share different types of insights on a subject that's very rich. It was interesting because Mila started out with the issue of artificial intelligence, which is directly related to the question of what is consciousness and to what extent can consciousness be manufactured or reproduced through computational systems. She then interestingly cited one of the fellows of the Academy, a very famous physicist, Roger Penrose, who was actually talking not about quantum physics, not about the proven theories of quantum physics, but about an effort of a profound thinking scientist to go beyond what science knows and what science can document, to philosophize on what might be the true nature of consciousness. And that gives us another perspective. And then we have a psychologist, Alberto, who works with a very wide range of people and knows all of the approaches of the science of psychotherapy to helping people, and finally comes back and says, but there's something that goes beyond all our methods, there's something that goes beyond our words, which we can experience intuitively and feel, and it doesn't matter what language we use to describe it, but this is something fundamental to us. So we get from these two a range of the scope of this topic, from the relationship to computation to our feeling of our place in the universe. I'd like to start not by talking about consciousness, but by talking about the way we know things, or rather the different ways in which we know things. And I hope that this will help reconcile, or at least put in perspective, the different ways of approaching this very complex issue of what consciousness is. Science, philosophy, and spirituality are each an attempt of human beings to know the reality of what we are and what the world is and what reality is. Science starts out and depends on the evidence of the senses and builds from that by using instruments to extend the reach of our senses, and through scientific methods of experimentation and scientific procedure to arrive at an understanding of reality from that basis. But grounded fundamentally in the evidence that we can obtain from an observation of the physical world, either directly or indirectly through our instrumentation. Philosophy gives a second place to our sense experience. Its instrument is the thinking mind. Its tools are ideas. And to philosophy, truth has a certain inherent value that derives from the logical consistency or symmetry of the ideas that we can have about it. Spirituality, and I'm going to use the term, the word can be used in many different ways, and I'm going to use it in a specific way. Religion is a portion of spirituality. I'm talking about that spirituality which is based on direct experience, direct personal experience, that depends on a conscious experience by a human being, not using their senses necessarily, not using their thought processes or ideas, but having a direct experience, which is what I believe Alberto was referring to, about his sense of the universe and the experiences he's had. It may be through the senses, it may be through the thought, or it may be in the absence of a sensation or a thought, but just from a direct experience, knowing something the way we know ourselves. How do we know that we are who we are? How do we know when we wake up in the morning that I am myself and not somebody else? How do I have that continuity between what I was yesterday or last year and the year before? There's something I know simply because I'm identified with it. I don't need to look in the mirror, hopefully, to know who I am. I don't need to think to know who I am. I know it because I'm identified with it. So by spiritual experience, by spirituality, I'm referring to that experience that we have by identity. Now, all of these three ways of knowing, which I'm calling science, philosophy, and spirituality, each depend on some characteristics of the human mind. And it's interesting that we spend all our lives using the human mind. Those of you who are students or professors, spend all of your time using this faculty of knowledge. But it's surprising how little time we spend reflecting on what is the nature of the human mind and how it works and how it knows, what are its limitations, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses. One of the things that's fascinated me, a few weeks ago we had a colloquium at CERN with the nuclear physicists, and we were talking on a subject like this. And I said, it's remarkable that science, if you read the history of great scientific discoveries, you'll find that most great scientific discoveries where we have the testimony of the discoverer himself, like an Albert Einstein and many others, they'll tell you that their greatest insights came not through experimentation, not even through a process of rational evaluation, but they came through something that, for want of a better term, they called intuition. an intuitive experience. And Karl Popper, who's probably the most famous philosopher of science of the 20th century, and known to have his feet on the ground and certainly well grounded in philosophy, says that in all of his research that he's come to the conclusion that the real process of scientific discovery is not through the scientific method. It's through an intuitive process which we don't understand. And what we call science is the effort to validate somebody's intuition through a procedure, through a process. So even science, which we consider with our feet on the ground, even science, its greatest inspirations come from something that we don't really fully understand, a process of knowing that we don't fully understand. So there are different ways of knowing, but all of them are related to the human mind. And there are human mind is a fascinating instrument that we don't understand very well. But there are some characteristics of the human mind which, if you reflect on, I think you can identify with. One of the characteristics of the human mind is that it's capable of going from one diametric pole of viewpoint, and over time, whether it's over a day or a century or a millennium, going to exactly the opposite viewpoint and feeling in both cases that it was absolutely right. Mind has the capacity to look from a perspective and see that perspective as if it's the whole truth. And unfortunately, one of our tendencies, and I'm not going to blame this on mind, I blame it more on our human nature, because we all like to be right, and we all like to feel that we know what somebody else doesn't, and our view is the right view. What happens is that we tend, when we get a viewpoint, and mind can argue from our viewpoint, we tend to affirm this and deny anything that's contrary to it. And if you look at the history of science, or you look at the history of religion, or you look at the history of philosophy, you'll see that we have this capacity to go from one extreme to the other. And I'm mentioning this because I think it's a good idea for us in approaching a topic which, if it's not sacred, to me it's a sacred issue of what consciousness is, but if it's not sacred, at least it's so much of a mystery that we must be very humble in pronouncing on it and think we can wrap it up and put it in a bottle and name it, and we think we know what we're talking about. I don't think that we know what we're talking about. So my first point is, let's be very humble in talking about this. Let's learn whatever science can teach us about it. Let's learn whatever philosophy can teach us. Certainly let's learn whatever religion or spiritual experience can teach us about it, but not be too much in a hurry to wrap it up and say, now we know what it is, and now we can put it in a computer program, or we can handle it through biotechnology. If you start with science, physical science started out, we had early science in the time of the Greeks, and the Islamic world had a tremendous role in the early growth of science, from which discoveries and viewpoints and texts came to Europe. The growth of modern science in the last 5 centuries started out looking at the nature of reality, but in a very specific, localized area. The scientists said, the early Enlightenment said, we're going to look at those phenomenon that are not phenomenon of the intangible world. We're going to look at phenomenon that are physical in nature, that we can observe through the senses, that we can measure. And we're going to develop a set of methods so that my measurement and your measurement can be compared, and our methods and procedures can compare, and we can come to some understanding or agreement about what truth is, what's true of the material, objective universe, the universe of objects, the objective reality. What about the rest of reality? They said that's not the purview of science. That's the purview of philosophy and religion, because we can't observe the intangible through our senses. We can't even observe our emotions through our senses. We can't observe our thoughts through our senses, whatever this thing consciousness is, or spirit is, or whatever word you want to use for it. So we're going to start by focusing on those things which are observable to the senses, and that was the birth of modern science. But over time, something happened. Over time, the idea that we must be objective, objectivity meant we study objects. But over time, the definition of objectivity, and if you go back and trace the etymology of the word, you can see this over a few centuries. The very definition of objectivity came to mean not what is a physical object, but what is something that you stand back from and observe and has nothing to do with your subjective inner experience. Initially, in other words, science said we will study the objective and leave the subjective to those who have the capacity to study it in other ways that don't lend themselves to science. But eventually science came to the conclusion, I believe, that only the objective reality is real, and only that which we can explain objectively, whether it's in terms of subatomic particles or chemical reactions or neurons, is real. And we must explain everything in terms of the terms of science, means in terms of objectivity of objects, of physical things. That's never been proven. That's an assumption that's rarely even considered when we talk about things. But I think what we see in science today is one expression of a natural tendency of the human mind. That if you look through history, there are periods when philosophy was reigning supreme. That was there during Hellenic Greece. Science was of interest. Religion was really put in the back seat, but even the science was in a very rudimentary fashion. The principle of knowing in the time of ancient Greece was the ideas of the philosophical mind. And we had a period in Europe during the Middle Ages when religion claimed the dominant authority to pronounce what was true, and all the books were burned, all the libraries were closed. You needed a lot of courage, like Galileo, to talk about what was going on in the physical universe if it contradicted religious dogma. Philosophy was discounted, science was discounted. And now we live in a period where science has pretty much done the same thing as discounting the legitimacy of other ways of knowing. It's been done by religion, it's been done by philosophy. Today, it's done by science. And I think it's important when we talk about consciousness that we're aware that this comes out of a natural tendency of our human mind, or at least the way we use that mind, because we see a portion of the truth, or we look at truth through a particular angle, and we mistake that and take that for the whole of truth. Now, consciousness. The word consciousness, as commonly used, is one of the most nebulous concepts that's used to describe one of the most profoundly real experiences that a human being can have. Whatever anybody may tell you, we know that to be conscious, to be aware, whether it's to be aware in our sensations, or aware in our emotions, or aware in our thoughts, or aware at some other level, deeper level, this is real to us. And yet, we don't have a clear language in which to describe what this is. Consciousness is that which appears to be the most defining distinction between living beings and inanimate material objects. We think if we really want to explain what's conscious, we point to the stone and we say, it's not like that. We are different than that. Interestingly, I've spent a lot of time studying Eastern philosophies and spiritual paths. Interestingly, in many, many different spiritual traditions, they will tell you that the stone is also conscious. Only thing is it can't express that consciousness, and we don't see any sign of it on the surface. I'm not arguing one way or the other. I'm only saying that appears to be the thing that distinguishes us. One of the things we know about consciousness is that it manifests at different levels. And I think it's helpful to think of these different levels as different expressions of something more fundamental. Physically, we are conscious. I'm conscious that I'm touching this table. You're conscious that you're hearing my voice. I'm conscious that I'm seeing you. It's a sensory consciousness. It's a sensory awareness. And we know we share that sensory awareness with other species, not only animals, but even plants. And there are so many experiments that have been done. We know that plants can tell where the sun is. They can lean towards the sun. They can grow towards the sun. They can extend their roots towards the water. It means they have a capacity of consciousness, not the mental consciousness of saying, now where's the sun going to rise today? Or we're not assuming that they have mental processes the way we have, but they do have a capacity for awareness, which we certainly don't credit the stone. I'm calling that physical. Then there's another level of consciousness. The word I'm going to use for it is vital. It can be described as emotion. It can be described as feeling. It includes needs and desires, fears. It would cover the subconscious actions of the animal, the cow who goes to drink from water and senses that it's poisonous and decides not to drink it, or the bird that goes and knows which berries it can eat and which it can't eat, even though there doesn't appear to be any way to detect it, or the animals that know the earthquake long before human beings are able to detect it, or even our seismic instruments are able to detect it. And then there's what we usually think of as consciousness, and that's our mental activity. I get up in the morning, I think what I'm going to do today, I think about what my problems are or my plans are, I reflect on what I'm saying, hearing, or reading in the newspaper. I'm mentally aware. I'm using the instrument of thought to be conscious. Now, to me, my sensation, my emotions, my thought are very different things, but they all are ways in which I'm conscious of the world. I can be conscious of you through my senses. I don't know what you're thinking right now. I can't perceive through the senses your thought. I don't usually know what other people are feeling, especially when I meet them the first time, but sometimes, and maybe some of you have had that experience, that if you know people well, even when there's nothing manifest on the surface, you do know what they're feeling, because you can be conscious, especially a mother with a child, I think, can speak best on this, but you sense the other person's emotions, even when they're not manifest on the surface. Certainly, that's not something that can be disregarded. Now, science, philosophy, and spirituality all use the same word to speak about these things, but I think fundamentally they're speaking about different things. The scientist is essentially studying the sensory processes and the way those sensory processes are manifested through the nervous system. The seeker of spiritual experience is looking for a direct experience that may be non-mental, and the philosopher is thinking about consciousness using the instrument of thought. Science has tended, and I'm generalizing now, to come to the conclusion that we must be able to explain consciousness wholly in terms of chemical reactions and electrical events that are taking place in the body, in the nerves, and in the brain. I question the validity of that assumption. It doesn't mean that there are no correlations between what happens in the nerves and what happens in the brain, what happens that can be reflected in the instrumentation and what we're experiencing. But I don't think there's any evidence that this is that, and that we can explain this wholly in terms of physical events. But that's a kind of prevailing assumption that's going on in most of the discussion about consciousness today. And when you go to the topic of artificial intelligence, which Mila raised, it's much more so. The assumption is that our whole mental experience is simply something that can be reproduced by the computer. We have a certain capacity for retention, we have a certain capacity for processing. I would question whether there's any evidence to support that view. Even if we could make computers do a lot of things the way we think a human being would do them, doesn't mean that computers have the consciousness of a human being. We have to ask who has created the software and the programming that enabled a computer to behave as if it's a human being. And even if it can behave as if it's a human being, that's only the outer manifestation. Is the computer conscious the way we are conscious? Does a computer feel and think the way we do? So anyway, these are questions, and my purpose is not to these are not questions that can be proven or disproven today, but what I'm trying to do is raise some of those questions so we can reflect with a little more humility and a little more openness on issues that are being debated around the world, but often without the kind of serious, open-minded discussion that I think it warrants. That's science. Now, what about philosophy? Philosophy, and I don't know that you'll find this written anywhere as a definition, it's my own understanding. For philosophy, the ultimate power of consciousness is the power of the mind. The power of the mind is the ultimate power for knowing things. I already started out in the beginning by mentioning one of the characteristics of the human mind is, today I can justify one point of view, and if you give me a little time to prepare, I can take another opposite point of view and justify it. Is the mind really an instrument that can know consciousness? Is consciousness an artifact or product of the mind, or maybe is the mind an artifact or product of something more fundamental, which we call consciousness, a limited expression of that consciousness? We have enough problems in the world to know that mind is fraught with error, that what we believed yesterday or last year or last century may not be credible today. But what have we learned about the fundamental characteristics of the human mind, except for the fact that people in the past were pretty stupid because we know that they were wrong? Well, what are people going to think 50 years from now about what we believe today? I have this fantasy that 50 years or 100 years from today, people are going to find it incredible and unbelievable that we were really looking to discover the consciousness in the computer, or think that we could explain consciousness solely from the point of view of the computer. It'll be as baffling to them as the views of humanity 500 years ago are often to us. If you look philosophically, and I've spent some time studying different philosophies, it's interesting. You have philosophies that declare that nothing is absolutely true. I said nothing is real. Well, you have Shankara's philosophy. He came to the ingenious conclusion in India that the world doesn't even exist, that this is only an imagination, whose imagination is not quite clear either. The world doesn't exist. Now, mind must be pretty powerful if it can convince itself that all of this experience is not real. Sound fantastic? But we've got science that does exactly the same thing in the opposite existence, and it tries to convince me that my emotions are not real, that my sense of self is not real, that it's only chemical and electrical events going on, and anything else I may feel and value is really not real. I once met a very distinguished scientist in India. He was a biologist and a physicist, very distinguished at an international level. He knew Watson and Crick personally, and who were the discoverers of the DNA, the double helix of the DNA. And he was talking to me with all the knowledge of neuroscience today, explaining how we're just at the end of really knowing the truth about consciousness, meaning consciousness as a physical phenomenon. And then he started talking to me about something totally different. He said, you know, science in India is really degenerating because people have lost their sense of integrity. They've lost their sense of what's really important. They've lost their quest for truth. They've lost the aspiration to really know things. And I said to him very gently, I said, this thing you're talking about, this integrity, this truth, this aspiration, all of this, is this also a chemical and electrical impulse that you're talking about, or is it something else? Because he would be willing to die for those things. They are more real to him than any material object. And yet his way of thinking about them is still entirely physical. I'm all appreciation for the great discoveries of science, but we should know we have to respect the boundaries, and we need to know what each instrument is good for and what it's not. So then, consciousness according to spirituality. And I'm talking from the mystical traditions that I've studied. Spirituality rejects the validity of sensory data, much as the way science knows that sensory data can be a distortion, much as the way philosophy knows that you can't trust the appearances. Even if the sun looks to be moving in overhead, we know now that the sun is not moving, we are moving. Actually, we're both moving, but relatively speaking, the sun is still and we are... So spirituality says the senses give us a view of reality, but it can't be trusted to tell us what the essential truths of reality are. It also rejects the ultimate validity of logic or of mental rationality. It doesn't mean that a spiritual truth has to be illogical or irrational or reject the evidence of a logical analysis. It means that the reality of consciousness that spirituality is trying to experience is something beyond what the logical mind can explain, at least at this point. It's beyond the term. The logical mind uses symbols, it uses words, it uses concepts, it uses language, all of which are limiting factors for something that is not limited, to something that can't be defined and narrowed down and put in a bottle. It recognizes the limitations of mental ways of knowing. It doesn't mean that we should give up mental ways of knowing. It means each instrument is good for its own particular thing. It also recognizes the distortions imposed not only by the mind but by the ego. Because the ego, we are so eager to know that we are right, to find that we are right, particularly if by finding I'm right I can find that somebody else is wrong. There's such a passion, and we admire people for their passionate quest for truth, but in a passionate quest for truth, how many of us can really stay dispassionate or objective or impartial and really see that our experience of truth is not the whole reality? Then what does spirituality affirm? Spirituality affirms the validity of direct experience. That I can know by directly experiencing something, even if I can't explain it, and even if it's contrary to the evidence of the senses. And now I come back to the great discoveries of science, because at least that's how many of them were born. By a direct experience, call it insight, intuition, revelation, inspiration, whatever words you care. And what does spirituality tell us about consciousness? It tells us that the whole universe is conscious. It tells us that there's something infinitely greater than our physical experience, infinitely greater than our body or our individual life, that seems to be alive and seems to be aware. Some people call it Gaia, that the earth is a living being, or the universe is a living being. Some people say that that consciousness goes beyond the universe, and call it by whatever name you want. Then how are we going to reconcile these three contradictory views and three different ways of approaching a reality that none of us can really say we know what it is? I argued first we should do it with humility. I think, let's be clear, all three, religion, or spirituality, philosophy, and science, have contributed in their own ways enormously to the progress of humanity, and nothing I'm saying is meant to disparage any of them. Science has uncovered miraculous mechanisms and processes of nature, and it's given us a tremendous power that we know about. Philosophy has given us logic, ethics, aesthetics, the wisdom of Socrates, Plotinus, who lived here 2 millennia ago, Confucius, Aristotle, Kant, and so many others. Religion has helped civilize humanity, helped in a big way in civilizing humanity, affirming the value of brotherhood and goodness. And spirituality has sparked our quest for something that goes beyond ourselves, something that goes beyond our mentality, something that tells us we still don't really know who we are or what the world is or what our purpose is, but it's something, it's a mystery, it's a miracle, and it's something worth seeking and trying to experience. We know that all three, or all of these, have also led to gross distortions, errors, exaggerations, and worst possible consequences when they asserted their way of knowing and denied everything else. And that's, science has given us nuclear weapons and the destruction. We have philosophies that have denied any meaning to our existence, any purpose to reality. Religion, of course, that speaks for itself. We know both the positive and negative sides of what's happened in the past. And as I mentioned, spirituality, at least there are some versions of it, will have told us that life has, the only thing we should do is get out of this world, because this world is an illusion or a wheel of karma. How can these three be recognized or reconciled? I think first by recognizing that there are three fundamentally different ways of knowing, going back to the knowledge that the Enlightenment thinkers had, and knowing we work through different instruments, we'll do what we can through each of these instruments, we'll respect the boundaries and not try to go outside our territory and take over the whole thing. Science is the best developed instrument we have for understanding the processes governing the material world, and none of us would like to live without the benefits that it's brought to us. Philosophy affirms and opens up our minds to truths and possibilities that are beyond the senses and the material world. It gives us thought. It teaches us that truth is beauty and beauty is truth. Spirituality offers us a path to direct psychological experience of an ultimate reality which we cannot explain in mental terms. I think each has its proper place and role to play. each should know its limitations and respect the role of the others. Each has a legitimate place in humanity's ultimate quest for the truth of what we're all about. We'd like to open the session up now, invite questions for any of the panelists or your own comments, your own thoughts.
Well, first of all, thank you for this lecture. I'd like to share some ideas that I came up with from this lecture.
Name, please.
My name is Samar. I'm a pharmacist. Well, from your speech, I'd like to say that conscious is more like a multidimensional object, and each perspective, whether spiritual, science, or philosophy, helps us to uncover side by side. If it is, yeah, okay. Also, another thing that I think conscious is composed of levels. Basic level, physical level, until we reach the highest level of all, on the level of the mind or thoughts or principles whatsoever. Yes. And I think consciousness is built of many components. First of all, we have to observe, to see, and then understand in what's called recognition. After that, we should process the data we gained or we took in order to give out a result, convenient result, that pleases us and suits our data. And I think this result could be the conscious itself. But my question here, I have two questions actually. The question here, is intelligence part of consciousness? I think consciousness is larger meaning, has a larger meaning, and intelligence is small part or unit of it. So artificial intelligence should be as well a small unit. Another thing, Dr. Gary, when you spoke about plants and stones and they have their level of consciousness, I think it's more like instinct, more than a conscience. And I have an idea I want to share. It's a question, and I don't need an answer yet. But is this instinct, can we say, an alternative for consciousness? Is it irreplaceable? These are my questions and my thoughts. Thank you so much.
Samar, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your brilliant insight. I'll address just really quickly I completely agree with you regarding intelligence and consciousness. Because intelligence, you know, we can only define things by proxy, by saying it's like this, it's not like that. It boils down to the finesse of language and the better metaphor we can find to approximate something. We cannot, in that sense, even our language is like our consciousness. You can only approximate, but can never pin it down. You can never close the gap in meaning. But that's what ensures continuation of language and communication. So with that being said, intelligence, another word for it, is a cognition, or is a way of knowing that Gary referred to. It is actually a form of computation, or associating ideas into networks, organizing data, storing them, deriving information. So in that sense, it's computation. And consciousness is something much wider, something that once you thought you were done computing, it escapes. It's a trickster. It is trickster consciousness. It's the one that escapes any definition and loves to play with definitions, but always escapes its own definitions. So the poetic quality of consciousness, that's what we cannot catch, luckily for us, because then there would be no more play. Yes? So, and in terms of, I absolutely commend you for what you said about levels, about multidimensionality, and I will tell you one simple sentence. The scale of perception, or the scale of inquiry, the scale of observation, conditions the conclusions of observations. The same thing that Gary said. If you stand at this point, it's going to look like the sun is circulating around you. If you look from that perspective, it looks like this. If you go to an extreme macro scale of cosmic observation, all of a sudden the stars look like dots. And if you go all the way down onto the quantum level, it looks like universe. So it's a vortex, passageway from one onto another to realize the subatomic world can create macro by explosion, and that the other can be condensed into a black hole into the subatomic. So it's a matter of looping and transforming. So I commend you on all of that, and I'm sure Gary has tons of amazing things to say. Truly impressed. Thank you.
Samar, I too can very much appreciate both your questions. I'm going to leave the first one because I think Mila's answered it very nicely.
He asked irreplaceable, yes?
I'm going to, the second one about instinct, I thought your comment was very perceptive. What I was trying to say about instinct, what instinct to us is, instinct doesn't happen through through what we call conscious mentality. If the doctor hits my knee and checks for my reflex, I don't think with my mind, now here he comes with the hammer, and when he hits me, my knee's going to jerk. The knee jerks, but there is a consciousness. We could call it subconscious. When I have my dinner, the body responds to the food that's been taken in and starts some complex processes. It is certainly conscious, aware of something that's going on. It regulates the temperature of my body in a particular way, regardless of variations in the outer temperature. So supposing what I was trying to suggest is, instead of thinking of these as different things, these are different levels of consciousness. So there's noise in the room, we don't perceive it because we're concentrating on our discussion. In psychology, they call it subliminal. It's not that we couldn't hear it, but we are directing our consciousness in a particular way. The things are going on in our body. Maybe if I really tried hard, I could hear my heart beating, but I don't normally do that. There are things that no matter what I do with my mentality, I'm not aware of them, but something in my body is aware and knows what. So if we think of it as different levels, some of it centered in thought, some of it centered in our active sensation, and others at different levels, all the way down to physiology, that would be very consistent with what you said.
Is that okay if I just add one thing? Oh, okay, absolutely.
Okay. Yes, Susanta?
Your view, my name is Susanta, that fellows of the academy have different views.
Of course, that's why we do, and we'd like to
Right.
hear yours.
Yeah, I think we heard, apart from you, Alberto, a very selective presentation of thought historically. I would begin with a summary I gave at the transhumanistic conference in Yale a few years ago, by ending that transhumanists may not know it, but they are all secular Buddhists. I am a secular Buddhist. When you talked about Upanishads, the Buddhist critique was all against that type of BS. When you say that the senses, 6 senses, the 5 senses, that's not a Freudian slip. That's a deliberate slip. In Buddhism, there are 5 senses, and the 6th sense is the mind on which it operates. So a computer model of the mind. I have an article coming in Philosophy East and West which compares the two. So we have different views. Spirituality does not exist in Buddhism. It defines as unspirit, anatma, that there is no essence, there is no soul. You're constantly changing. When my father dies, the banner is all compounded, things decay, right? And you see the big, when you say consciousness is sacred, the Buddhist texts say that if everything is changing and if you consider consciousness as unchanging, that is a totally false view. The best entry into this type of dialogue to see the debates between King Menander, that was a Greek king in northwest India, and a Buddhist monk. The first dialogue between East and West. I mean, philosophy didn't begin with Socrates. I mean, let's forget about that. So I have a feeling that if you look at the world in a non-spiritual sense, that there is no spirit, that we are all compounded, and we dissolve away. The Buddha's last words itself were all compounded, things decay. So I am a secular Buddhist, philosophically and practically. I don't do meditation, but as a meditation, you know that in humanist psychology, Maslow's last book was The Further Reaches of Human Nature, which is a distortion of Buddhism, you know. But also you know that a lot of medical techniques are being done by mindfulness meditation. So in my view, a lot of mumbo-jumbo of the spirit should be flushed down into hell where it deserves to be, which does not exist.
Thank you. Thank you. Who else? A lot of hands up there, so we get a chance to hear as many as possible. Could I ask you to be brief? Yes, please.
My name is Sami, and I'm from Zuwil City of Science and Technology here, which is a new establishment in Egypt. And actually, I'm with all humility, I'm an experimental biologist, and I'm actually I'm still compatible with what you said. Actually, I'm very intrigued with so many ideas that I heard today. But every time I hear something about quantum reality, I hit a wall, and this is because I have some problem in that I can formulate. I'm trying to express myself in this respect. If we are thinking that consciousness is following the underlying quantum mechanical aspects of the underlying neuronal circuits, then we have a state of entanglement. And in quantum mechanics and in the non-locality concept specifically, you need to apply a specific operation in order to not to uncover reality, but you actually generate this reality. So my question is, do we have a collective consciousness? And if we have a collective consciousness, do we have a supreme operator that's working on us from outside? And if we have that supreme operator, we would be actually entangled with each other. And we actually are aware of each other more than the external consciousness, because the external consciousness doesn't know the reality until he operates on us. Do you have any reflection on this?
Okay. We'll take other questions. We'll come back to you at the end. Thank you. Who else? Yes, next.
My name is Ahmed Taha. I'm a third-year pharmacy student in Alexandria University. I have a question. It's a very debatable question to find a definition, an exact definition of a word like consciousness, and I think we will never get to an answer. So so that we always need to have this area to play. My question was, if I could try to simply define consciousness as some sort of perception, a way how I know things, a way how I identify myself and others. I would love to hear all of your opinions. How is the consciousness built up in human? Is it? Do you think it's rather an integral part of human DNA? Is it built up by environmental factors? Is it a part of the cumulative and the cumulative memory of a certain civilization, or is it maybe built up by mixed factors of all of these?
Thank you. Yes.
Good evening. My name is Tarek. Dr. Gary, one of your proposed solution to solve the conflict between science, spirituality, and philosophy is for each and everyone to hold its boundary in regard to give a definition on consciousness. In the meantime, the major discoveries, scientific discoveries in history, the scientist usually engages in the three realms simultaneously. So how could this boundary be achieved? Thank you.
Good. Yes, in the back, yes.
My name is Angie. I'm a PhD student. Actually, I have two questions. The first is I wanted to know is the difference between being unconscious and being under general anesthesia before operations. The second question, I want to know if someone being under general anesthesia is do he has any levels of conscious?
Could you repeat the last one again?
Is there any level of conscious under general anesthesia? Thank you.
And the second one?
So first, I wanted to be the difference between being unconscious and being under general anesthesia. The second, I want to be, is there any level of consciousness under general anesthesia or not? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, in the last row. Yes.
My name is Haytham, and I teach dentistry, Faculty of Dentistry. I wanted to comment on 4 aspects and mention them as questions and as comments at the same time, simultaneously. First thing was to Mila's notion of qualia. And you mentioned that qualia is a bit of an understanding, as a subjective perception or understanding of a certain experience. And I wanted to get a bit of insight that's a bit similar to one of my colleagues, what one of my colleagues asked. How do you sort of gather this qualia? How do you get this qualia? And would it be just that certain people have a certain qualia that is subjectively different from another qualia of a different person? The second question is to Alberto, and you mentioned 4 or 5 contributions to how we manage our psychological or mental health. You mentioned coping mechanisms, the locus of control, and 3 other points or notions. And I wanted to know, would you order them differently? Or would you give them the same equal contribution to how you balance or counteract a certain experience or a certain living experience? The third one is, would consciousness, and that's a general one, would consciousness be transferred from a person to another person? And would it be shared? Similarly, is it cumulative in nature or not? And the last one is, we discussed a bit on spirituality, and I wanted to know, how do you think you can cultivate or trigger a certain level of spirituality? Is it ritualistic only? Is it innate? Do you come with it, or do we need to work on something to cultivate spirituality? Thank you.
Okay, and in the row in front. You first, and then, yes.
My name is Salma, I'm a pharmacist. As long as I have my own conscious, how can I control my conscious? How can I control it? Because sometimes I find myself telling some words that I'm not conscious, or looking to some sides that I don't want to look at. How can I control myself in that aspect? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
My name is Megid. I'm a telecom consultant. And we've discussed that I'm a big advocate that the instrument determines our conclusions. So we've discussed like sensational consciousness, rational consciousness through thought or a mind thing, and materialistic consciousness. However, I think we also were bridging the gap between microanalysis and biomaterials and getting to the physical and the macro and maybe the holistic ethereal, which is the third maybe dimension that we can be talking about. My question is, if we're insufficient of instruments, arriving at this conclusion and bringing the perspective of having an exoself away from our bias or overjudgment bias, how could we think about an omni consciousness level, where I believe the key word would be omni existence, omni consciousness, to see things from all perspectives, because only one angle missing deteriorates the whole picture all around. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes. Sorry. Ben. I didn't hear. Can you repeat?
The mic.
Help me to understand.
Halo effect. The shell of energy that
Halo.
Oh, halo.
Or
Hello.
you mean
this is the first question.
aura, means, an aura.
What is the question?
Repeat it again.
Do they differ? Do the halos differ from person to person?
According to beliefs.
Finally understood.
Yes. The second question for Dr. Jerry Jacob. Does telepathy and emotional connection between people and each other is really exist? And if it exists, is it a kind of emotional consciousness? Thank you.
Excellent. Very good question. Okay, then we'll hear and then we'll go there. Please, go ahead.
My name is Bahauddin Muhammad. I am undergraduate pharmacy student. I'd like to ask if I believe about course I will study. It's very difficult. This will reflect on my performance in this course.
Okay. Is this a course? Yes. Should we get?
Yes, please.
So we can hold this.
My name is Ada Abdin. I'm studying at Faculty of Science. I just want to ask, we talked about consciousness, but why didn't we say anything about the role of subconsciousness in achieving our goals, in setting targets? We could harness it to draw an image of what we really want to be in future, and through time, by repeating what we really want to be, it could realize it, make it true. Why didn't we say anything about it and about its role? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Yes, my name is Joel from Uganda. I would like to know if there is any relationship between consciousness and sleep, or is sleep a state of unconsciousness? And the second question is, how is it? I cannot explain the fact that, I cannot explain the exact time that I slept yesterday. How is that related to consciousness?
Yes, please. We have two here.
Okay, doctor, my name is Yumna. I'm a third-year medical student. Third-year medical student. Okay, you have classified consciousness into sensory awareness and emotions. Now, regarding sensory awareness, I felt that you meant by sensory awareness that if I can hear you, then I have a sensory input, but there are other sensory inputs of which I'm not aware, and I shouldn't be aware of. For if I'm fully conscious of what's going on all the time, it would be distracting. And actually, I believe in the definition of consciousness as the most central to our existence and the most difficult to comprehend, and I believe it should forever be like that. I do not wish that we would ever one day comprehend the consciousness. For not being able to understand everything around us would leave us with an innate feeling to link to a higher source of power. The slavery is innate and worship is innate. So I believe forever consciousness will be unconscious to our own ability to think of it. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else on this side?
We have
Okay.
someone over there. I don't know if there's one.
In the back there, yes, please.
My name is Muhammad Saeed Abu Laila, and I have a question regarding the extrasensory perceptions. Does they really exist? Some scientists may relate that they were sort of innate, something that we have, and the degree of civilization contributed to depressing this sense. Does the sixth sense really exist, and either in our conscious or our subconscious? So that's my question, and thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, we'll take two more then, this one and that one.
My name is Omar Salama. I have a question. Is consciousness measurable? I mean, can we say that, or can an observer say that someone X is more conscious than Y? And such comparison, what is the meaning of such comparison of this, if this comparison is valid?
What is the meaning of what?
Of a comparison in...
Is a comparison between someone more conscious and someone less conscious. What is the meaning of such comparison if it's valid?
Okay, my name is Yumna Mahmoud. I'm a medical student. I want to ask about whether consciousness is consciousness can be expressed by the brain function at different levels, or the brain is just one logical tools, or one of the logical tools used by consciousness, and the consciousness is something beyond the brain. I mean the mind as outside the brain, something beyond the brain, including other maybe physiological organs or physiological tissues in our body, but just the science can't explain it till now. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I have one more up there.
Okay, last one.
Okay, thank you. If we define consciousness as the perception of reality, then wouldn't that contradict with dreaming? Sometimes while dreaming, you believe that the dream is reality. Sometimes when I dream, it's like I'm living in a whole different universe, and I believe in it. I feel it.
It's real.
Yeah, isn't that like I'm conscious that is reality, but at the same time it's not. So that's my point. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Alberto, go ahead and answer whatever you want.
Well, to a lot of questions, I have a very simple answer. I don't have the slightest idea. What about the halo? I don't know. And so I'm just a modest psychologist. Although I'm a curious citizen, I would give my answer because the topic is very hot, so to speak. And everybody in the literature gives different... I'm not going to go by... I'm going by subject, trying to make some order. What is consciousness was one of the last questions. Well, there are many different... we would have a conference just for answering from this angle. But I am impressed by the fact that we call life form any organism that has this capacity, self-awareness and self-regulation. from amoeba to human being, this mechanism is innate, and when it fails, there is no survival. Second, Carl Rogers, with whom I study and work for many years, and is one of the fathers of humanistic psychology, has accumulated 80 years of research on how people have innate self-actualizing tendency, and that's in humans based on the fact that, like any simple organism, when they become capable of self-awareness and self-regulation, then we call it health, mental health. And people with mental health are, like Maslow and our friend there was underlined, they have peak experience. You know, they don't feel limited to the skin of their body, but they see brothers and sisters, even with different color and religion, but they feel keen also to tree and to mountains. So they're less likely to just see them as things to kill life or destroy environments. I don't know if it is consciousness, but something pretty good. Another thing, I have to put glasses. That is a low form of consciousness. I forgot to mention that somebody said how you promote or protect consciousness spirituality. Well, Carl Rogers had not ideas, but tested intuition, and in 80 years, the last proof is 2013, starting in 1942, and is on Google or whatever, three qualities. An environment that is facilitative for people to become fully functioning is an environment that is not judgmental. You know, that I see you and I see you, a woman, a man, good news, a human being. Black, white, good news, a human being. So to see in people their potentiality. Another thing, instead of judging with my prejudice, to see a person and to be curious to enter the phenomenology of that person, the culture of that person, which we call empathic understanding. I was talking in the other session about how when a doctor has empathic understanding for the patient has less days in the hospital, recuperates more fast, and actually has even less, secondary problems after surgery. And the third one, and here we go back in consciousness, is congruence. By this difficult word, Rogers meant my capacity to symbolize my organism, to symbolize without distortion and without censorship my experience. That's very interesting because, again, if you read any mystics, it doesn't use the Rogers research, but it says always the same thing. All the mystics say the same thing. I also add that all the mystics had trouble with the organized religion to which they belonged. And that's another question. And I would say in the barrier of natural spirituality and consciousness, sometimes there is an organization and power that wants to have monopoly of what is the other answer, is innate or is learned. Certainly one way, one good recipe for spirituality and consciousness, if you want to promote it, don't destroy in your children. It's not something that has to be injected. What is injected in the natural spirituality and natural consciousness is the interpretation of the phenomena. Like each religion try to underline what is the right interpretation of a natural experience. Or sometime in history, I'm a Catholic, Catholic Church was excommunicating people that were daring to read the Bible. Why? Because the Bible is the Word of God. If you, normal citizen, read the Bible, then you're going to make yourself some ideas about what God speaks to yourself. That's the same trouble with the mystics for the churches. Mystic talks directly, so it's cut short the distribution. It's like from consumer to producer, and the distribution is taken out of the picture. I think this historically has been kind of true. And the other thing about what is the proof and what is the order. Well, in order research, Kobasa and Kobasa did another summary of what are the characteristic, the common denominator of resilient people. People that are more resistant to stress when it's chronic, to bad condition, that get sick less, and that live longer than the media average. Well, these people are characterized by optimism, self-efficacy. They are not afraid to change. They see the change not something to be afraid about, an opportunity, you know, or say, oh, well, if I change, I have capacity to learn how to cope. Then they have a characteristic that's very important. They're good at contact with their emotion. They have a capacity to express it in a constructive way. They don't spill their emotion on others. They have a good capacity to ask for help. And they have a rich support group, friends and others, to ask help when they are in need. They have a healthy lifestyle. They don't abuse of tobacco, pharmaceutical, drugs, etc., etc. They are quite productive, and like Maslow found, they are not accident-prone, and they have, whatever their religion or no religion, a meaning in life. So I would say that everything that promotes this promotes all the others. And finishing, brain research, actually the field of brain research has been advancing tremendously lately. And I have a former student of mine, actually, that is a famous professor and a researcher nowadays at the CISA of Florence from, and she's young and beautiful, but has done an enormous amount of research. She was with Jacoboni and Rizzolatti in the discovery. She was a doctoral student of the neuron, the mirror neuron. Now we're doing some research with our PhD students that are becoming from psychologists or medical doctors, psychotherapists. And we are researching if they get in a 4-year postdoc training, you know, there are people who have, you know, really much more mirror neuron than others. But what we noticed, the best people that are, you know, showing this are also the best therapists, but also they are the best human beings. They're humble, they're willing to listen, and they trust the universe. They might be religious or not, but they have a deep trust in life. Others, I don't know. All the rest, I don't know.
Thank you. Mila, would you like to?
I'll go line by line and try to be about this, and I'm overwhelmed. Before I say anything, I'm overwhelmed with this spiritual sensation. I wish every single one of you could take turns to look at yourself from this perspective. I've been soaking in your beauty, your brilliance, and I am amazed by what has happened today, and I'm very, very happy to be here and humbled by you. That right here constituted for me a peak experience in spiritual experiences. For some of you that have come closer, you've seen me crying a lot, overflowing today. With that being said, I was going to address Fast and Furious. And as I go, please forgive me because I have to just be fast. As far as Buddhism and no spirituality, I personally, from my perspective, could say that the notion of all compoundedness and no differentiation is due exactly to this change of perspective and scale of observation, because if you put yourself at an extreme perspective and value the position of what is called a witness, then you'll understand that things become magma. They become unified, moving mass together of no differentiation. As if I can give a simple answer, yes? I value Buddhist perspective beyond measure. Whoever said, if you see a Buddha, kill him, and I hope you do know who said that, right? That is quotable Buddha for you. That was a brilliant mind that said, do not stick to what I created as a path. Make your own path. There's nothing here to follow. Your life is your guidance. Good luck. As far as Sammy, where's Sammy? Experimental biologist, Sammy. Supreme operator and diffusion. That's me writing a note for you. Good luck decoding myself. You said you asked if there's a supreme operator, right? And somebody else mentioned that if we have this many perspectives, it's a matter of continuous distortion, right? So I am saying if there is a supreme operator, it's collective. The only way that you are going to find the truth and the one pair of eyes, I'm kind of caricaturing this a little bit, but if you wanted to find the source, guess what you're going to find? A magma, a compilation of all the perspectives, and good luck to you calculating to get to the bottom of it, because it's not going to happen. So again, good luck to all of us. So it's a collective supreme operator, and thank God for the diffusion. And somebody else, who was that up there? Some brilliant beauty stated a paradox, saying, well, in essence, consciousness will remain unconscious, and thank God for that. One of the key features of consciousness is paradoxical thought. The capacity to uphold paradox is one of the key playful features where you get to play with contrasts, spin them into one, see that they're like yin and yang, mixed and matched, and not be able to get to the bottom of it, and yet savoring, literally, there's neural juice that you get to savor, there's delight. You all felt something like that when you water at your mouth or anything like that. And especially if you're on the high spiritual scale, especially in the Indian tradition, they say you get to hear music in more refined ways. Your taste palette gets better, and that's why we fast. So when you eat at Eid and Iftar, okay? So trying to combine them fast and furious, let me see. Hold boundaries of the three observer. Torah, am I right? Somebody spoke about, Angie was talking about consciousness under anesthesia and unconscious and conscious. I will not venture into details of that because I'm concerned that that is not my specialty. But the fact is that I did research, especially through Stuart Hameroff, and he was amazed because he saw that there are layers and levels of it at which you can go and invade the body that will not remember when you wake up that kind of pain and that kind of invasion. But on the lowest scale, I can tell you that one of the answers for some of us that we spoke about, layering, multidimensionality, and this and that, and what Gary spoke about, please let us not forget the embodiedness. It is so important, it is such a big deal, that all the religions try to control it. All the religions try to control it, and that's why it's such a big deal. Because there is a sense of cellular consciousness. And I can guarantee you, if you have a surgery and you don't have any pain and you take a bunch of painkillers, I will tell you then, say in 2 weeks' time you can be in the street, but in a year's time, your cellular memory and memory on the deeper level from under anesthesia will catch up with you cumulatively. So take your time to recover after births and on and on. Take your time. Don't let anybody push you around to start serving right after you have a child. Out of politeness and tradition. Don't do that. Don't give away your experience and the baby's experience. That's a whole other issue. Fast and Furious, I have combined several of them. Let me see. How can I control my consciousness? I think this is what Alberto, in a lot of ways, again, I will say different internal levels. And if you try to control, it will trick you up in so many ways. So remember, it's a trickster. Sensation, biomaterial, very, very important. I am telling you, I already mentioned the embodiment. Let me see. Halo, very important. I loved your question because we do know that just one of our organs, the wise one, which one is the wise one? What do you think? The heart. The heart consists of 65% neural cells. So it has a brain of its own and has a magnetic field, electromagnetic field around us that expands beyond the envelope of skin. Are they different? You betcha. I have not, well, let's not get into my personal spiritual experiences. They were all done without drugs, just so you know. All natural style, the way Alberto recommends. But I will tell you, it's an imprint. There is an energetic imprint, the way your eidos, your face, your image is unique. That all the Islamists would love. And that's why it's so sacred. Now you don't try to represent that kind of perfect imperfection and uniqueness, yes? Okay, I think I got it covered. Brain function and physiology, I already spoke about. I think I'm good for right now, unless you want to ask me something else. I think I've covered the basic. Oh, one more thing. Huge question. Aidan? Yes? Aidan, I apologize. Please bear with me. You asked about transferability. A couple of major researchers, one of them is in Google, and the other, all robotics. I can even find you references if I get my wits together, because I'm tired, because my body's telling me something, yes? It's vindictive. They are speaking these days about uploadable and downloadable consciousness with such conviction. Mind you, these people are at MIT, at Google, at places that to me are odd. Okay? So they're there, they're talking, they have the funding, they're being listened to, and their knowledge and their vision is being disseminated. They talk about downloadable, uploadable, and you know what else they say? Transhumanism. In fact, they claim consciousness can function on other platforms rather than biological. Honestly, that doesn't mean that I'm a proponent of that, because I will tell you right away that that's exactly what Gary spoke about. You created that. That's the product of, that's the baby of your consciousness that created it to begin with, and it's not going to be the same consciousness. And I will tell you right away, same things we spoke about emotions. We can think whatever we want, but I will tell you right away, emotions are your greatest GPS in this world, period. If it does not feel good, something's off. You're either disconnected from the messages that your own body is telling you, your values, or whatever it is. If it doesn't feel good, sit with it. Don't run away from it. Sit with it. That is your GPS. And finally, one aspect of, I hope this will tie it, intentionality. I think I wrote that somewhere around Buddhism. I don't remember where that was anymore. But even without spirituality, and even in Buddhism, your intention matters. How you're going to qualify it, what you want to turn, and that's exactly what I spoke about in the first section. So, in other words, good luck to us all, and we're all doing a fantastic job in all of this.
The most important thing about this meeting for me is your questions, not our statements and certainly not our answers. As I tried to preface when we started, we come here to raise a subject which we think is very important. We don't represent our views or our individual views. We're not representing the views of the World Academy or any particular organization. We feel this is a subject important. To me, I said it's sacred. I don't mean that it need be sacred to everybody. But we think it's important enough to try to throw off the jargon, and everybody has a right to think about this freshly for themselves, freed from any restraints, whether they're scientific or philosophical or otherwise. I'm just going to touch on a few particular questions, not for their importance, but because either they weren't covered or because I think that something I said needs to be clarified. One important one that came somewhere here was, isn't the instinct of science to go beyond boundaries, and if science is to respect boundaries, isn't that a contradiction? I'm glad that point was raised because I would like to make myself clear. I think trying to go beyond boundaries in any way is great, and trying to question and challenge and see how far we can go and how much we can discover. And if consciousness is the most immaterial thing in the universe, it doesn't mean we shouldn't study in detail as much as we can its connections and reflections and expressions in our chemistry, in our neurology, in our psychology, in our bodies. All I was trying to say is, let us respect, let us know that no matter how far we go through an instrument, that our instruments are limited, and that doesn't mean we're seeing the whole truth. And it doesn't mean there aren't other truths and other perspectives of those truths beyond. So that's why I kept coming back to humility, not the humility of don't ask that question, it's wrong. Ask all the questions, try all the experiments, explore everything, but don't come to the conclusion that just because from a particular point of view you think you've understood things, that negates other points of view. That's all I was trying to say there. Somebody asked, what about telepathy? Is it possible to have emotional relationship with people at a distance? Does it exist? I think the right answer to this is each person should try for themselves and find out for yourself. I can tell you in my own experience that I have had that experience of somebody I love deeply very intensely trying to relate to me from thousands of miles away when I had no idea that I wasn't thinking of them at all. And it was as if they were right here. It's a personal experience for me. No scientific study could ever convince me that it's not true, because it's a personal experience. Have your own experiences one way or another, come to your own conclusions. That's more important than whether telepathy exists or not. How can we think about consciousness, and I'm not sure I'm phrasing this question properly, when our own consciousness is limited? I think that's a very good question. What I meant to say is our thinking is limited, not our consciousness is limited. Thinking is only one form by which we are conscious. That's what Mila is saying when she said trust the heart and not the head. And there are many such forms. So if you want something that's beyond thought, don't use thought. And if you see in the mystical traditions, there are many mystical traditions say that real knowledge is born only when the mind stops thinking in silence. So one way to try to sense a reality beyond thought is to stop insisting on thought, which is probably one of the most difficult things to do, especially for educated people as we are, because we've come to believe that thought is our ultimate instrument of knowledge. So I hope that helps. Finally, I'm not going to answer others. I'm just going to end with a quotation from an Indian who's was variously described as a great freedom fighter, a philosopher, a yogi, and a poet. And he says of all of these, the closest description is he thinks he's a poet. His name was Sri Aurobindo. He died in 1950, and I'm just going to quote the first 3 lines of a poem. You decide for yourself what this man was talking about or experiencing when he wrote this, and this is 3 lines of a longer poem. It's all I could remember now. I have become a snow-white sea of bliss, a curling wave of God's delight, a snowflake on the seas of paradise. Thank you all. It's been a thoroughly enjoyable session for us.